B Herron. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Courtney, so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate you taking time out of your weekend to do this. To introduce myself, I am an indie author living in the Pacific Northwest, and I have kind of an eclectic background as far as how I got from point A to B, but I've worked everywhere from in vet clinics and zoos to working in human medical areas, and I write on the side. That's me in a nutshell, except for my obsession with dogs. And of course, that's a whole nother side hobby. We could do a podcast on that.
Love it. I would love if you could tell us what your books are about.
My books are, I have pardon me, I have a series called Elemental Wolf series, and there are two books out currently in the series. And they follow a young Native American woman named Nora who lives in Portland. And her backstory, if you will, is she is what I called a wolfkin. She is a creature, a person who has two souls in one body, and so she has her human soul and her wolf soul. And when we meet Nora, she has just gotten out of a devastating breakup. She's been trying really hard to live in the human world and be in a more mundane existence. And in the process of doing so, she has essentially separated herself from her wolf soul. And so you start the book off kind of at a hard run in the sense of she has become unmoored from who she is and what she is, and she is trying to find her way back to her ground, her own 2 feet, 4 paws, if you will. Um, it's kind of a ride that there's a little bit out there for everybody. I really lean hard into the element sense of it's called the Elemental Wolf series because we go through the different elements in nature, go through the different elements in the human experience. Each title is going to have a sense, taste, touch, vision, and we're going to have an element. So, you know, fire, water, earth, air, and kind of going from there. So I really take apart what it means to what are the different elements of the human experience. Like what does love look like? What does friendship look like? What does family look like? What does found family look like? Um, eh, we go into the elements of sensuality or sexuality. So she has that side to her. I couch the books under being romance because of the sensuality and sexuality within the books. It's all a sex positive view on an urban fantasy romance. And I will tell readers ahead of time, I leave you a little bit on a cliffhanger on the first book with Nora, but I promise the second book is in print, so you don't have to stay on that cliff. You can jump straight into the second book. And I don't leave readers hanging quite so hard on the end of the second book. There is a romance element that weaves through the whole book. It's not a happily ever after the first book. You're going to come into the second book, and it's more building the building blocks of what we all go through in our day-to-day lives. We don't end up falling in love in 400 pages typically. So it's a little bit more of a stretch there. There's also, I just want to mention, because it's kind of near and dear to my heart, I have a short story published in an anthology called Seasons Unceasing by Wordsmith, and it's called The Season of Fern and Feathers, and it's a more of a fantasy look of what I like to write and involving nature and kind of a tribal community that um, relies on birds, and it's just a fun. If you're a fantasy lover, I highly recommend just checking it out. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my books in a nutshell.
Love it. What inspired you to write your books?
Um, I I've always been an avid reader. I grew up in a house where both parents read to my sister and I constantly, and I as soon as I was able to hold a book in my hand and read a word on a page, that was it. You never saw my face again. I just my sister would give me a hard time. We'd be at the dinner table and you'd see my mom's face, my dad's face, and there would be a book, and then my sister's face. And I just took that love of reading Um, and one day, all of a sudden, I was like, I could, I could write. Like, this is a thing people do. I could also produce these stories that are out there. And the one caveat to that was I'm also dyslexic, and so I was lucky. I got diagnosed early in school, in grade school, but there always seemed to be this overshadowing because you are dyslexic, because you can't spell, because your ability to do punctuation and grammar is kind of uh, challenging. That no, you can't. And so I always had that in the back of my head working on me of like, you can read, but no, you can't spell, so you can't write. And I kind of thumbed my nose at it, and I started writing. I just never admitted to it. So I would write in the back of notebooks. It's in school. I started the whole bad poetry thing in high school. Um, that'll never see the light of day, I hope. And I went from there to exploring more story when I got into college. My undergraduate degree is in zoology, so I was always front and center with taxonomy and having to learn Latin names and animals and all that amazing stuff. But in the background, I was writing, and about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I started my own little business, which is on the side. But I had these chunks of time that were suddenly open to me, and I'd been writing short stories for friends. And so I started working on watching water in these moments where I had unexpected downtime, and that started it. And it suddenly I had a whole book, and then suddenly my friend's like, "You could publish this." I'm like, "Oh, really?" And it went from there, and now I'm actually really learning the craft and dedicating time to it. And that's yeah, there is my eclectic, long-winded answer for you.
Love it. When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who the book is for?
Um, Honestly, I was writing the book for me, because I didn't realize at the time that I was going to write a book, and I had one friend who I would send her chapters, and every time I sent her a chapter, she's like, "Next chapter, please." And so it was kind of, I mean, I was writing it for me and I was writing it for her, and just for the joy of what kind of story do I want to tell? Do I want to hear? Do I want to read? And so I didn't understand at that point uh focusing on an audience for what it was I was doing.
Love that. And I know you touched on this, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Um Sitting down and seriously starting would be back in 2016, I guess. I mean, I'd always been writing, just I never finished any story. But I was always starting new stories. So I'm still what I would call a baby author. I mean, I'm new. I'm learning every time I get on Instagram. I learn new things from all the amazing people on there. Every time I read another book, I'm learning, and it's a wild ride. I'm enjoying it.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
I think most of the time I usually am trying to write a book. It feels like I'm always in the writing process. And I consider editing as part of the writing process, because when I'm editing, there's a lot of rewriting that happens. Um, but when I'm really in the zone, I'm taking those hours before work, and I'm taking those hours after work. And I used to take hours during work, but I no longer have those. That I'm working on story. And so it's those moments and the weekends, and that's me spending anywhere from half an hour to an hour to 3 hours if I have the time to sit down and really craft.
Amazing. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Uh, Mostly quiet. It's kind of, it's varied. I can write in a noisy airport. I can probably write in a like a sports stadium if I needed to. Just once I personally am in the zone, there's not a lot that will distract me. Um, But that being said, if I'm at home in my office, which is my preferred writing space, uh, I don't listen to music. Can't listen to music. I can maybe have the window open and listen to birds or listen to the wind or white noise of traffic sometimes. But yeah, I'm not one of those amazing people who can listen to a symphony and write a book at the same time. That doesn't work for me.
Love it. What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
I can't eat and write at the same time. I am either all in or the food is distracting. So that I will maybe mow down on some chocolate right before I sit down to write, but whatever I'm eating has to be done before I start touching the keyboard. As far as drinks go, I usually have tea or hot water that's sitting next to my computer, and it ends up getting cold before I ever remember it's there. I'll set timers to make sure I get up and move around or take a drink, and yeah, there's not a lot of. I'm a little boring in that regard, I suppose.
What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
When I was younger, it was definitely fantasy, as much fantasy and sci-fi as I could get my hands on. It's been an evolution of what it is I spend my time on and what draws me in. Um, in college, I started doing reading more paranormal romance, and that carried me kind of out of college. And I discovered Laurel K. Hamilton with her uh, horror version of I guess at this point it would be called dark romance. There's been such an evolution in terms. Um, but nowadays I find I kind of look at and read almost anything. I do some nonfiction. I do some um, uh, historical fiction. I'm all over the map, really, and I've been enjoying it. I've been enjoying exploring other genres, but my true love falls into epic fantasy and um, romance categories.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
I would say everybody that I read growing up, every piece of that, starting with like Treasure Island and White Fang, and moving on to, and I'm gonna authors forgive me, I I'm bad with names, I'm good with titles, but the Heart's Blood series with dragons, that was a young adult series. The Greenwich series, Shadows and Stone, I think. Oh, I might be getting that wrong. Um, all of the Narnia, of course, was a world I spent a lot of time in, and then coming, you know, progressing older, Laurel K. Hamilton for sure. Mercedes Lakey, I got lost in her world, Valdemar and the Heralds and everything. That was, I think, one that really I want to do this. I want to write this. I loved everything from riding horses to, she had characters bonding with birds. It was just my little zoologist heart just went pitter pat. And I just thank all the authors that came before and all the books that I've read. They're just each one brought me closer.
What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
I probably would pivot to Mercedes Lakey, was probably my all-time favorite. That was the one when I started her Arrows of the Queen series that I was lost. We'd go on vacations. I would have my nose in a book, and my sister would be yelling like, "We have a beach," and I'm like, "I'm in this book." She's like, "But beach." So that one stole my heart.
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Patricia Briggs, I definitely automatically grab hers. Michelle Sagara, I think is how you say her last name. If I butchered it, I'm sorry. Uh, I find her world building and characters just absolutely fantastic. I'm one of the ones that it's waiting on um, Martin to finish the Game of Thrones series. When that one drops, I will I will be one of the people in line for that book. I am also holding my breath for the next Rebecca Yarrow book. As soon as that third one comes out, and I'll be all over that. So there's a lot. I could keep going.
Love it. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Just starting out with reading again, I- pick up what calls to you. Pick up what makes you curious or what you're interested in. And I don't like the adage of don't judge a book by its cover, but if you see a book cover that's like, ooh, what's that? Go for it. Try it out. And if it's not quite what you want, try something else out. And then audiobooks are another great way to rediscover reading. And I have friends who that's all they found an audiobook and now they're like 20, 30, 40 audiobooks into their reading career and they hadn't picked up a book in years. And I look at audiobooks a little differently than actually sitting down and reading a book, but it's still story. It's still this world that somebody has created and find what works for you that I don't know, transports you to other worlds or teaches you something new. And I think it's just a really powerful way of connecting with the human experience on a different level.
Love that so much. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
That's a great one. Writing your own book, don't stop. Just give it a shot. Put it all on the page. I mean, especially with my background of feeling like I couldn't and feeling like I shouldn't and just no, don't let somebody else tell you what you can and can't do. And if you really want to do it, you're not going to write Harry Potter the first time around. You're not going to write Game of Thrones the first time around. The first words you put on the page, and that's okay. Just write what you want to write, and then start learning about how you can make it different and better and improve it because you don't have to be perfect on the first go, on the first draft. You just got to get the words out. And that's what editing is for. That's what rewriting is for. So just enjoy the experience and you can show people or you cannot show people. You don't have to make it anything more than you want it to be.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Oh, I would have to ask people. That's a great question. I generally surprised to find out about me. I don't like horror movies.
Is there anything you would like to say or add?
What I guess we'll leave people with is just enjoy literature in whatever way you want to consume it, whether it's comics or audiobooks. I think we are such a storytelling people that there's this connection that we make with characters that we don't always make with people in our lives, and I think that's the power of stories is how it can connect and how we can learn being inside the pages of a book or just stepping into the imagination that somebody else has put out there. So just if you want to read it, read it. If you want to write it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Just embrace it.
Love that. Where's the best place for readers to find your books? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
Great questions. The best place to connect with me is either through my website, which is abherron.com. There's two R's and a heron. You can find me on Instagram at a.b.herron. And as far as finding my books, they are up on Amazon. They are at Barnes and Noble. Um, and signed copies. Right now, I'm trying to do a certain amount of book events. I'm kind of limited in my scope at the moment, just to the state of Oregon. So if you are lucky enough to be in the Pacific Northwest, you can follow me on Instagram, and I list the different book events that I will be at for signed copies. At some point, I hope to make them more accessible. But Amazon and Barnes and Noble are the easiest ways to find them.
Amazing. Well, thank you so, so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate being here.